What's all this fuss about fair maps? Have you ever heard of gerrymandering, where politicians in power select their voters instead of allowing voters to pick their representatives? For over 30 years, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign has been working for you and your family for fairness and justice in our state legislature, because the power of the people is greater than the people in power. Welcome to Fair Maps Forward, the podcast that takes you on the journey to make our representatives govern according to the will of the people. Here are your hosts, Nicole Gabrail and iuscely Flores.
Hey folks, my name's iuscely Flores. I am the organizing director for the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, a fiscal project of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, who is also a very proud partner of our coalition. And we're joined with and by...
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Gabrail, and I am the volunteer and relational organizer with the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, and I've been with the coalition since June of last year. Today we are joined by Carlene Bechen, who is the chair of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee, who is the group of ladies that actually drafted the proposal for an independent redistricting commission bill that we are discussing today.
Hi, everybody. I am the chair of the League of Women Voters Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee, a group of 16, I think now, really feisty, super smart women who drafted the proposal for independent redistricting legislation. But before that, I had Sally's job. I was the organizing director for the Fair Maps Coalition, and I held that position for off and on for 6 years, 5.5 years, something like that, and got to work hand in hand with Sally for a couple years there. And so I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to be here with Nicole and Sally today to talk about this proposal.
Yeah, Carlene, you said hand in hand, and I just thought about the kid who doesn't want to go to school and just doesn't want to get on the school bus, and you're literally just dragging that kid over onto the bus, and you're like, come on, you gotta go, let's do this. And so I'm always appreciative of that and how you just took care of the coalition in a way that I think is always going to be bigger than everybody else and bigger than us here at the Fair Maps Coalition now.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Carlene is our very first guest on Fair Maps Forward. So Carlene, if you could kick it off, please, by telling us what led you to get into this work or step off the curb, so to say, and why do you personally care about Fair Maps?
Well, what some people who've known me for a while know is that I was a public educator for 30 years and in Wisconsin. And I was here when Wisconsin public schools were very well funded, and we vied for just the best record for kids doing well coming out of school with Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin. We're always 1, 2, 3. And then something happened. Something really bad happened, and we lost funding. And I was hyper focused on education and education funding. But the state legislature cut funding in dramatic ways and put all kinds of caps and other sorts of things on that. And I started paying more attention to why that was happening, and realized that folks really felt strongly that they wanted their public schools funded. And I went to hearings of the Joint Finance Committee and heard most of the people talk about wanting funding for public education, and then saw the legislature not pass it. And so I came to realize that the gerrymander, the imbalance in who was making the decisions about, you name it, public education funding, gun violence prevention, legalizing marijuana. There's a long list of things that voters across the political spectrum really want to have happen in our state that are not being addressed. And they were not being addressed. And that was because politicians were not accountable to voters because of the gerrymander. They didn't have to worry about getting reelected because their districts were so strongly, sometimes up to 80%, that their party. And, gerrymandering happens. Both parties do it. And it's wrong. It's just flat out wrong. It does not represent voters. And so, I realized that if the thing I was hyper focused on, public education funding, was going to be addressed, that I needed to broaden what I was thinking about and really start to work on the core problem, which is gerrymandering. And we could go on to gerrymandering is based on money, but that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah. So we know, because we've lived it, the ad hoc redistricting committee from the League of Women Voters has been meeting diligently over the last 2 years, and you and other amazing ladies have been hard at work crafting this proposal for an independent redistricting commission that we've gotten to take on the road, and we've presented at over 40 cities already. How would you describe, Carlene, the FMC's proposal for an IRC to someone who's completely new to this stuff?
Well, I guess I would start out with talking about voting. You vote. It's important that your voice matters, that your vote counts more than just as a number, but that your voice has an impact. So every 10 years, the census comes out, voting districts are redrawn based on population and other considerations. And when politicians have that power, they tend to try to make the maps favor their party. What we are proposing is an independent redistricting commission that uses citizen commissioners who are trained and use criteria that would specifically not advantage one party over the other, but would take into consideration other things, including communities of interest, economics that are similar, all kinds of things. And there are measures for that. There are ways that you can measure whether maps are partisan, whether they represent people well, and what we're proposing is that we put into place an independent redistricting commission that would create those maps so that our voices matter. So they will be heard, not just counted, but will be heard. And politicians, the people who we elect, will be responsive to us.
So one bright spot in our political landscape is the progress made here in Wisconsin on redistricting, particularly in 2024 when Governor Evers signed new legislative maps into law. Can you please describe this progress and who the people are that are driving this work?
So when Governor Evers came into office back in 2019, in his first budget, he proposed money to end gerrymandering and to put together a commission or something. It was taken out of the budget. And so he came up with the People's Maps Commission, and the Fair Maps Coalition at that time did a lot of work to educate and engage the electorate about what was happening. So there was a lot of work that went into not making much of a difference in the maps that were passed by the legislature after the 2020 census. But the thing that did happen is that people knew what gerrymandering is, and they knew that it wasn't helping them personally or the things that they wanted to see move forward. And so that was a key. And as a result also of those gerrymandered maps being put into place again after the 2020 census, the law firm Law Forward brought litigation, the Clark case, Clark versus the Wisconsin Election Commission, and said these maps are unconstitutional based on several different claims. And they asked for original jurisdiction, which took it to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court said, yeah, you're right. These maps are unconstitutional. There were 6 maps that were presented to the Supreme Court. A pair of nonpartisan, highly respected experts reviewed the maps that had been presented. And they said, well, Supreme Court, you could choose any of the 4 of these. And these are fair maps based on, recognized criteria. And these 2 are gerrymandered. So you shouldn't consider those. And as a result of that, our state legislature decided, hey, maybe we should pass some maps. And so they did. They passed the maps, ironically, that the governor had proposed to the state Supreme Court. And the governor on February 19th of 2024 signed those maps into law. So what we have right now are fairer maps than we had before, much fairer maps. And we can tell that because in the very next election, there were more candidates of both parties that ran for office. More voters came out and voted. And a good deal of the reason that that happened was all that education that we did, because voters said, by God, you need to ungerrymander these maps. It is not okay for you to mess around with our votes and stack the maps so that one party or another is advantaged. The problem with that, it's not permanent. And that's what an independent redistricting commission statute or law would do. It would put in place a permanent solution so that independent commissioners would be the people who would draw the maps, not politicians.
So these new fairer maps that we're currently under are just temporary?
That is correct. They will hold until after the 2030 census, when we know how many people we have in our state, and that automatically makes the maps unconstitutional because there's a new census and new numbers, and so the Independent Redistricting Commission, hopefully it's what we're working towards, right, is getting that legislation passed so that there will be a commission in place after the 2030 census that can use the resources to create maps that are not gerrymandered.
And Carlene, for anyone that's not aware, can you please explain to the audience why we consider these maps fairer, but not completely fair?
That's a really complicated question. These maps are more fair than the gerrymandered maps that were in place before. And, fair is one of those words that's kind of open to interpretation and perspective. I think when I personally think about why I describe them as fairer is that they're a step in the right direction. There was not really community input on these maps. There was not really, there were no public hearings on these maps. There was not an opportunity for voters to respond to them. And that is a big piece of the Independent Redistricting Commission and should be a big piece of any redistricting process, so that we are making sure that all voters are represented as fairly as possible or as vigorously as possible. And, I kind of would love it if we could somehow get away from that word fair, because people always say, well, what's fair? So it is a tough thing to describe, but I think for me, the thing that will make them most fair is when there is an opportunity for public input, for voters to weigh in on what they think about the maps, when we've used all kinds of acceptable criteria to measure how balanced they are in the representation. But let's be totally real here, right? There are parts of our state that are dark blue, and there are other parts of our state that are brilliant red. And districts in those parts of the state are going to be blue and red, right? The demographics of where people live will impact the maps. It doesn't mean that we have 50-50 representation. And I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that fair means 50-50. It doesn't mean 50-50. It means equitable representation.
That's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out, because I think there is a lot of confusion on what exactly fair maps entails. Can you explain the significance of the new fairer maps and what this means for the August primary and November election?
Well, as I said, after the 2024 signature on the maps in February 2024, that fall, there were more candidates that ran because they actually had an opportunity to maybe win an election. So that I assume, I would predict that that will be the case again in November's or the August primary and the November election this year. We have 7 candidates for the governor's race on the Democratic side, and I think 2 candidates on the Republican side. So there's a lot of excitement about that. But also there are lots of races in the state legislature and the state Senate that before were sometimes 80-20, 70-30, 65-35, and running in those primaries and then in those elections is expensive. And so sometimes candidates, if they had money, would run just to try to bump up how many people voted in their party, but they knew it was futile, that they were not going to win, but they did it to get messages out and other kinds of things. I think this time, as I said before, there's super blue, super red, but there are more places where seats are closer together, and it could be a toss-up who might win them. And so it makes candidates and eventually electeds more accountable to the people who elected them. And if you have enough races that are closer, the ones that are absolutely blue or absolutely red, those people have to cooperate with the others because they're not the majority anymore. You don't end up with a legislature that is super out of balance.
Yeah, and well, this proposal didn't come together overnight, as we know. It was years of research and many, many hours of dedication, and well over 40 community hearings to get public input, like I mentioned earlier. I know a lot of folks want to trust the process, but in order to trust the process, they want to know about the research process. So, are you able to just give us some more insight on how we Frankensteined a model to create the Wisconsin model?
I think I mentioned way at the beginning that one of the things that Governor Evers did in his first term was to create the People's Maps Commission. And during that process, we all learned, all of us who took part in that learned a lot about redistricting. And one of the people that we heard from is a scholar at the Brennan Center named Michael Lee. And he pointed out that we have been talking forever about the Iowa model, and let's just lift it up and put it down over in Wisconsin. And he said that won't work. It won't work for Wisconsin. The demographics of Iowa and the demographics of Wisconsin are tremendously different. Ethnically, educationally, economically, to geography. It's just so different. You can't just pick it up and put it down. And that model has worked really well for them, but it's too simple for Wisconsin. There are just too many other things to think about. So we knew that the Brennan Center knew a lot, so we started with the Brennan Center and we asked their redistricting experts to come talk to our committee, and they did. And that brought up a whole nother wealth of questions that we had about, well, what makes a good independent redistricting commission? At the same time, the Campaign Legal Center and Common Cause both produced some reports about what had happened during the 2030 census. So we read those reports and we asked ourselves lots and lots and lots of questions about them and what we thought would work here. And then we interviewed some of their scholars. We talked to Katie Fahey over in Michigan, which demographically is very much like Wisconsin. One big difference is they have a ballot initiative, so they could put a redistricting commission on their ballot as a constitutional amendment and have voters vote on it, which they did in 2018 and passed, and they have one. So we looked at lots of different states. We kept hearing California is the gold standard. California's been doing this the longest. They're the gold standard. And Michigan is most like you. And so we just picked and chose various things that seemed like they fit our situation the best. And we kept talking to these scholars. Okay, this is what we have. What do you think? What is your feedback? And they would send us questions. So we did that for the better part of a year because we had been telling people we need an independent redistricting commission. We knew there was going to be an election. And when the election happened, we said, well, we could have fairer districts. We could have a more balanced state legislature. And then we could move on to getting this independent redistricting commission. But what does that look like? So we scrambled and, by God, I think we did a really good job because we were, as I said, it's 16 super smart, very dedicated women which include the three of us actually, that have worked really hard and sometimes at odds with one another because we don't always agree. We've learned to respect one another's opinions, to really take seriously what the areas when one of us has a discomfort. Like we've learned that that's not just being obstinate. It's really someone who is thinking kind of at the next level past where I'm thinking or where you're thinking. And so it's been long, it's been arduous, it's been frustrating, it's been joyful, it's been rewarding. And I think, based on the feedback that we've gotten from voters, from the scholars that we worked with, and from some of the legal folks in Wisconsin who are very interested in this, I think that we've come up with a really good product.
Yeah, I think for the visual learner too, what I really appreciated was that we had a spreadsheet. We basically had an Excel sheet with each model state, and then we shared that amongst the 16 of us. And each model state, we had sort of a drop down of questions. So, how many commissioners does this state have? How many maps do they produce towards the end of their redistricting cycle? Like, it was just a layer of questions, and that kind of allowed us. That's why I call it the Frankenstein model, because then we basically were able to repeat exactly what you said, take some of those best practices, the best models, and then really 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 create this thing that really worked for us. And you alluded to, it was really important to get feedback from voters just a couple seconds ago. So why was it important for you to get public participation?
Because we want this to represent voters and we want voters to feel confident. We want them to trust that it's a process that has voters' interests at heart. And being able to ask questions, give input, give critical feedback, I think is super important. And for me, that's one of the elements why I called the maps that the governor signed fairer maps, but they didn't have that process, right? There was no process for giving that feedback and for me, that's key. That's absolutely key. When I was a teacher, and so I taught for 30 years, and I taught sixth grade, and sixth graders are really big on fairness. That's not fair, but that's not fair. My grandchildren now, that's not fair. And so I used to do this exercise that somebody would say, that's not fair. And so I said, let's talk about fair, right? So just imagine I'm a doctor and Ucely comes in and she's got hives all over her body and her eyes are itching and, just all kinds of symptoms. And I say, oh, wow, that's too bad. Take a couple aspirin, get some sleep, drink some water, come back and see me tomorrow. And Nicole comes in and she has horrible stomach cramps and all kinds of symptoms that go along with that. And I say, oh, gee, wow, that sounds really miserable. Take a couple aspirin, drink a lot of water, and come back and see me tomorrow. I was fair, right? I treated them both exactly the same way.
Essentially.
So it was a lesson for my kids, like, okay, my students, I try to provide for you as a teacher what you need from me as a teacher. And so some people need this thing and other people need this thing. Sally probably needed some kind of anti-allergy thing to help with those hives and the itchy eyes. And Nicole probably needed some kind of I won't say all those words, but she probably needed something to settle her stomach. And they were different. And it was being equitable, and it was treating each one of you the way you needed to be treated. And I think when we think in terms of meeting people's needs in our state, if we have a gerrymandered legislature that only thinks of one solution for how things go, that's not fair to anybody. And if I don't get to say, well, this is what I need where I live, and these are the communities that should be in the same district with me because we share a school district, we're in the same watershed, all those kinds. Economically, we depend on these things. That's my community of interest. If I don't have that opportunity, then are the fairest maps being created? I don't think so.
I thought that was a really good metaphor. Gerrymandering is a really complicated topic, but at the same time, I think the solution to it is something that even like middle schoolers can understand. So earlier on, we were talking about how the process for creating the draft proposal took almost 2 years. And I came in at the tail end of that. I think it was within 1 or 2 months of me joining the coalition that the draft proposal was finally completed. And like you said, Carlene, it was really amazing to me to come into this work and just see how like such a diverse, such a big group of intelligent, very opinionated, strong-willed women could come together and respectfully disagree, offer their opinions, and create such a complicated, detailed solution to our gerrymandering problem. Now that the draft proposal is completed and has been submitted to the Legislative Reference Bureau, could you please walk us through the timeline?
Sure. So this is best case scenario, right? We submitted the draft proposal for legislation for an independent redistricting commission to all state legislators on October 16th of 2025. We had a rally. We delivered them. We'd sent them electronically, but we also took them in paper copy. That went to the Legislative Reference Bureau to turn into a bill. And the drafter there had a lot of questions about what we meant about this. And so just what our intentions as the lead committee was in what we had written. So we responded, took us about a month to respond to all of those. It's back with the Legislative Reference Bureau now. And we have met with a couple of redistricting champions in the state legislature to talk about some of the things that we still have questions about, and they have questions about. And we've said, we really want to have something that we can share with the public and say, okay, this is not our draft proposal anymore, right? This is the working draft of the bill because the legislature has it, and this is the working draft of the bill. And we want to be able to say to voters, contact the candidates for the state legislature. Every single assembly seat, every single one will be up for re-election in November. Some will have a primary in August. We want as many candidates of both both the main parties and any other independent, Green Party, Libertarian, whomever else runs to commit to supporting the Independent Redistricting Commission legislation. So it's super important that they know what's in it, at least at this point. And half of the Senate is also up. So it's really important. The governor is up. We want to make sure that we have a gubernatorial candidate from each party, and however many ends up running, that supports this, so that when they come into session in January of 2027, this will be the first order of business. I would love to see it be AB1 and SB1 and pass right away. That's my dream. And, the governor has proposed a constitutional amendment. There's going to be a special session on April 14th. And perhaps that will also pass or be up in January. The one thing about it, I think that is a concern for me, is that it doesn't address congressional maps. That would just be state legislative maps. And, it doesn't put into place a process, but we've written a process. So it would ban partisan gerrymandering, and that would be at the state level. So, wow, if these things could move in tandem, happy days. So that's our best case scenario timeline. So, keep your ears open, because we are going to be asking you to contact those folks.
So you said half the state senate, the entire assembly, and the governor's office is up for election in November 2026. And those are all of the people that decide whether or not we get fair maps for Wisconsin. So this is a really important election coming up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and no one can say what Wisconsin's government will look like after fall 2026. And what we know is that some folks are discussing the possibility of what, a Democratic trifecta would look like in our state. What would you say to folks, Carlene, particularly those who are more Democratic leaning, who might want the party to try its hand at gerrymandering if they do get a majority?
Wow. This takes me way back. 2009, there was a Democratic trifecta, and there were two different proposals for nonpartisan redistricting in the state of Wisconsin, because the Democrats looked at the 2008 Barack Obama win. State was very blue. And in 2010, a Republican trifecta was elected, and they got to draw the maps. Gerrymandering is a bipartisan disease. The people in power want to keep the power. And, in fairness, they think their policies are the best, right? They want to push forward their own policies. Well, I'm sorry, if you have to push forward your own policies by rigging the maps so that you are the ones in charge no matter what, those are not the best policies for the people. And I am all about people power, not politician power. And so, I think that would be a really bad thing to have Democrats say, we're in charge now and we are not going to pass this. So as I said before, it's super important that we get legislators from whatever party they're running from to pledge that they will support an independent redistricting commission, because then we have the opportunity to say, hey, look, you said this, and we're holding you accountable.
Yeah, I really think we should get bumper stickers that say gerrymandering is a bipartisan disease. And when we do these presentations in Spanish, and when I've talked to folks in Spanish, there's not a direct translation for gerrymandering. That since 1810, the 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 U.S. has constantly manipulated the election since 1810, right? And having these conversations in Spanish with folks, like it's kind of like the light bulb explodes, because they're like, oh, so there is electoral manipulation in this country too, and it's kind of their, they if they found the American dream, and then you kind of burst their bubble, and it turns into a nightmare really quick.
It's the same thing that happened with my parents, because as I've told you, Sally, before, both of my parents came from former dictatorships. And so my whole life they were constantly singing the praises of America and democracy and, you know, telling me how lucky I am to live in a free country, in a democratic country, and that when I turn 18, I'm going to get to vote in elections and those elections are going to be real. And imagine my surprise when I learned that that's not the entire truth. So, in this field of work, we say the word democracy a lot. What does democracy mean to you, and what does it look and feel like?
Wow, that's a big question, super big question. I think democracy to me is seeing people, recognizing that we are all worthy, that our voices matter, that we belong, and figuring out ways to empower people to be able to use their voices in ways that make a difference for themselves, for their communities, for their children. It's absolutely imperative. I had this conversation the other day with someone who said, you know, do, do you really think that the maps make that much difference? Like how important is it for everybody's vote to matter? I mean, and this person said, you know, like people who've been to college and they do these things and they're, you know, poor people don't really know that much. They don't have time to keep up with things. And my response was, you're making the assumption, first of all, that if people aren't educated beyond, you know, high school, that they're not smart. And that if people are poor, they're stupid and they don't know what's best for them. And so when I think about democracy, I think we all bleed. We all have a heart. My mother taught me a song when I was a kid, and it went, close your eyes and point your finger. On the map, just let it linger. Any place you point your finger to, there's someone with the same type blood as you. England, China, or Alaska, Mexico, or Madagascar. Any place you point your finger to, there's someone with the same type blood as you. It may be A or AB, it may be B or O. Whatever type it may be, sir, there's one thing you should know. Nature has no favorite nation, color, creed, or occupation. Any place you point your finger to, there's someone with the same type blood as you. All of us are worthy. All of us deserve to be counted and heard and respected. And that, to me, is democracy.
And how do you feel Fair Maps ties into that vision?
It gives us the opportunity to stand on the same playing field as the richest person in the country and have the same amount of influence. Again, we could go back to the money, right? I mean, I don't have nice things to say about our U.S. Supreme Court and their decision on Citizens United. But gerrymandering was around before that. And people were manipulating maps before that. It just made it a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing our end of questions, and the song, I feel like I'm gonna have to go Google it and print it out and frame it somewhere because it's a gentle reminder
I
that
didn't sing it, but I can sing it
I
to
was
you at some
I was
point.
hearing it in a singing voice in my head because just the rhyming felt really just comforting in a way. And you know, there's so much happening at the federal level, and you kind of alluded to some of those things. And it's also hard not to feel like you're spread thin. Why is this an issue?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've already, I think you've already, you know, made your case clear, but to close this off, why should people get involved with this issue and why now?
Well, you said it. There's a lot of things happening, right? This issue has been at the forefront in Wisconsin for a long time. And because of the things that are happening at the federal level and internationally even, right? we have more agency in the state of Wisconsin than a lot of people do. And true, it's kind of, there's everything's on fire and we're just using our hoses to keep ours from burning down. I think that this is an opportunity for us to be a model, to show that we can and will do things that are good for all the voters. It is our opportunity to create a state legislature to elect a state legislature that actually hears the voters and has to work together. Again, there's really blue, really red, but there's a lot in the middle, and those people are going to be elected no matter what. But the more the competitive races get elected, the more all of them have to look for common solutions that address the issues that really face the people of the state of Wisconsin, and also create laws that protect us from some of the federal intrusions on what should be state jurisdiction. And so I think, our U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights there is supposed to protect us from government, right? Government overreach. And our state constitution has provided for what government will do for the people of the state of Wisconsin. And I think that we have the opportunity to really be proactive. And so that's why now. It'd be really easy, I think, to say, nothing I do matters. But I disagree. I think everything we do matters. Every choice we make matters. And, we don't have to we don't have to give in to the doomsday. We don't. It's our choice.
Yeah, Carlene, well, I feel like we're witnessing history here, so thank you so much for being on and helping us push Fair Maps forward.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
And thank you so much for all of your work over the last 2 years to make this proposal a reality.
And over the last decade,
it has
truly
been a pleasure.
Well, folks, we just wrapped up our first ever episode of Fair Maps Forward, and we'd like to remind you to take action and sign our pledge on fairmapswi.com. Tell your legislators and those running for office to support an independent redistricting commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. And please tell us what you think. Send us emails with your comments and opinions to iuscely@fairmapswi.com. That's iuscely@fairmapswi.com. We plan to read your emails on future shows as time permits, so keep them clean. Visit our website, fairmaps.com, and follow us on Facebook. See you next time.